George Bush doesn't care about black people.
Good morning and welcome to AM Joy. That was the moment George W. Bush called the worst of his presidency, getting called out by rapper Kanye West on national television for his failure of leadership in response to the humanitarian crisis after Hurricane Katrina. Now it's Donald Trump who's leading the disaster response, as many of the 3.4 million American citizens in Puerto Rico continue to go without food, water, or fuel after the island was devastated by Hurricane Maria more than a week ago. Trump's response has been criticized as slow, inadequate, and insensitive. And on Friday, the Washington Post reported on how Trump's time at his golf course last weekend contributed to the delays. Well, this morning, the White House press secretary called that story false. And the mayor of San Juan added this on Friday.
If anybody out there is listening to us, we are dying, and you are killing us with the inefficiency and the bureaucracy. So, Mr. Trump, I beg you to take charge and save lives. If not, the world will see how we are treated, not as second-class citizens, but as animals that can be disposed of.
After that desperate plea for help, Donald Trump responded early this morning by attacking her on Twitter. And the mayor of San Juan, Carmen Yulín Cruz, joins me now. And Mayor Yulín Cruz, before we get to Donald Trump, first tell me about the state of San Juan and how things are going. Your plea yesterday to the world moved so many people, and I think so the first thing people want to hear is are things a little bit better this morning? How is everything going?
Well, we got a big donation yesterday from Goya, 200,000 pounds of food, all together from private donations, and they keep coming after yesterday. We already have on site about 400,000 pounds of food, and rather than getting one container of water and one container of food that we were getting from FEMA, we got around 6 of them. So we are glad today at 11 o'clock, the production line of aid is going to begin, and we will be able to put out an enormous amount of quantity of help for people. So it's a good day. It's a good start. It's a good dawn, and we're moving ahead. And that's what it's all about. It's about saving lives. It's not about politics. It's not about petty comments. It's about moving forward, putting boots on the ground and saving lives.
Well, speaking of petty comments, the President of the United States woke up early this morning with you on his mind. And I'll just read you a couple of the things that he tweeted that I'm sure you've already heard about. The mayor of San Juan, he says, referring to you, who was very complimentary only a few days ago, has now been told by the Democrats you must be nasty to Trump. Did anyone tell you to go out yesterday and to name Donald Trump as you were making your pleas for help?
Actually, I was asking for help. I wasn't saying anything nasty about the president, but don't take my word for it. General Buchanan, 3-star general, has said as one of the first comments that he's made about the Puerto Rico situation that he doesn't have enough troops and he doesn't have enough equipment of what he needs to get the situation under control. So who am I? I'm just a little mayor from the capital city of San Juan. This is a 3-star general telling the world that right now he does not have the appropriate means and tools to take care of the situation. This is what we have, one goal. It is to save lives. I tweeted this morning that this is a time when everyone shows their true colors. I have no time for distractions. All I have is time for people to move forward, get help. And what kind of a Puerto Rican, what kind of a human would I be if I know of other mayors that are getting no water and no food, and I just looked the other way and just had my city taken care of? So I will continue to do whatever I have to do, say whatever I have to say, compliment the people that I need to compliment, and call out the people that I need to call out. This isn't about me. This isn't about anyone. This is about lives that are being lost if things do not get done properly real quickly.
And, you know, not only did the President of the United States, I think it's such an important point, because you are trying to work for the betterment of your city. The President of the United States not only attacked you, but also attacked, it seems like, Puerto Ricans in general. He tweeted, such poor leadership ability by the mayor of San Juan and others in Puerto Rico who are not able to get their workers to help. They want everything to be done for them when it should be a community effort. 10,000 federal workers now on the island doing a fantastic job. That implication is that the people of Puerto Rico essentially are too lazy to do it themselves and want the federal government to do everything for them. What do you make of that attack?
You just have to walk around the streets and see people coming together to help in the cleaning. All these community kitchens that are coming up out and about, people that are coming from different countries to help and to help in the communities. What are we going to do? We are using the leadership of our communities to help. We have 6,300 employees at the municipality of San Juan. About 1/3 of them lost their homes and everything. The rest of them have been working not because of Maria, but remember, because of Irma. We have been at this since August 31st, nonstop, 16-hour, 20-hour shifts, and I want to be thankful to the mayor of Chicago, the mayor of New York, the mayor of Miami Beach. I got a call from the mayor of Boston, from the mayor of Newton, Massachusetts, Columbus, Ohio, all willing to help. You know, mayors are the first line of defense for citizens. We help them, round them up, and really, if you're a good mayor, you follow your people, and that is what we have been doing. So again, and I can say this to you with a smile, I am not going to be distracted by small comments, by politics, by petty issues. This is one goal, and it is to save lives. Yeah. That's all that matters. And whomever is here to help, whomever says things that can help, will be praised. Whomever doesn't, will not. And again, 3-star general saying, we don't have enough. So it's not only me.
The USS
I believe we have some echoes out there.
Yeah, the USS Comfort is finally on its way. It's going to take a few days to get there. A lot of people criticizing the Trump administration for not sending it earlier. Trump now saying that on Tuesday he and Melania Trump will come to Puerto Rico. Do you want to see him? And if he comes to Puerto Rico, would you meet with him?
I will meet with anyone that comes to our city, because we respect the democratic choices that people make all around the world. So if Mr. Trump wants to see me, I would be very glad to meet with him. But again, this is about saving lives. And what I would really like him to do is not just have a helicopter ride over to survey areas, just to go out into the towns where people are drinking out of creeks, or the towns where all the cows and the dead people are together, or those towns where there is no medicine, and hear from the people of Puerto Rico and see their passion for life, see what we are doing to get back on track, and listen to their hearts. One can visit as a photo op, or one can visit to make sure that things get done the right way. So I'm hopeful. But again, he's the President of the United States. I afford him the same respect that I afford the leader of every other nation in the world that was democratically elected.
And one would think that that ought to be reciprocal as well.
My fight would be just one. I'm fighting to save lives. Yeah. That's it. This isn't personal.
Mayor Carmen Yulín Cruz, thank you so much for being here. We all, I'm sure the entire country wishes you well, and the people of Puerto Rico well, our fellow American citizens. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. And now I want to bring in Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett, who's the representative for the U.S. Virgin Islands, which is also struggling to recover from Hurricane Maria. And Representative Plaskett, you heard or I'm sure have seen that the President of the United States is attacking the mayor of San Juan as she is struggling to help her people recover from Hurricane Maria. The U.S. Virgin Islands was hit with a double whammy, Irma and then Maria. Can you tell us if the recovery is going any better on the U.S. Virgin Islands than it is in Puerto Rico?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I have really grave concerns about the recovery that's happening in the U.S. Virgin Islands at this time. As you said, we were hit first by Irma on St. Thomas and St. John, and then Maria on St. Croix, both of those Category 5 at the time that they struck our islands. And I've been down there for the last week visiting with people, being out in the grassroots where everyone is, and I have some real concerns as well. We lost both of our hospitals. We are operating with one emergency room. We have medevaced all of the inpatients off of the islands to the mainland, and I have yet to see on the ground discussions about how a real hospital is going to be put in place. There are discussions about an operating room in a box. That's not going to suffice for what the people of the Virgin Islands need. There have been distribution centers that have set up, and that's fine for people who live close to those distribution centers or who can drive there, but that doesn't help those individuals, our elderly and others who are in communities that cannot get there. I've talked to people who didn't have water, have not had water for a week. This is untenable. I've made my voice heard to the federal government, and I have real concerns. That's why Elijah Cummings, the ranking member on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, and myself wrote a letter to my colleague Trey Gowdy asking for an emergency hearing to discuss both Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, where there are real concerns about this recovery effort.
The administration, particularly the President of the United States, seems to be primarily concerned with getting good headlines and sort of demanding good headlines for the recovery efforts in the U.S. Virgin Islands as well as Puerto Rico. Have you begun to focus more on asking members of Congress, as you just mentioned? Have you given up on trying to get the White House to pay attention?
Well, you know, right now, the federal government is on the ground in the Virgin Islands, but I believe that there's a real disconnect between what the federal government and FEMA have been told that are the issues with the people of the Virgin Islands and what the grassroots and what the actual individuals, residents, are needing. For example, the Army Corps was really happy to tell me that they were able to get the potable water up. But most people in the Virgin Islands, their homes are not powered by city water or water coming from a municipality. They're collected from rainwater, and we have cisterns. All of those homes, that water is probably contaminated now, and EPA has not been down and is not doing testing in any of those homes to date. Those are the kind of issues where there's a real disconnect. And, you know, we hear headlines about what's happening in Puerto Rico. Joy, I can't tell you the low morale that the people of the Virgin Islands have right now about how the federal government and the rest of their Americans feel about them, because we hear nothing about the people of the U.S. Virgin Islands. You know, there's questions in people's mind, well, maybe it's because Puerto Rico has 3 million and we're a much smaller island. And unfortunately, some of us are beginning to think that maybe it's because the U.S. Virgin Islands is a primarily black territory that we're not hearing anything in the news. There's no discussion about us. The president is going to be visiting Puerto Rico, and we were struck well before Puerto Rico, and we have yet to see that level of interest on the ground in the U.S. Virgin Islands.
Yeah, I will say the tweet this morning in the tweet storm did include that he plans to visit the U.S. Virgin Islands as well as Puerto Rico. We will see if that comes to pass. Congresswoman Stacey, oh, go on. Did you have something?
I was going to say, well, you know, he says he plans on visiting us. Puerto Rico was hit by Maria head on, and it's devastating there. But we were hit a week before by a Category 5, and we've yet to see that happen.
Yeah. Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett, thank you so much for being here. We welcome the opportunity to have you on and to keep the U.S. Virgin Islands in the headlines as well.
And thanks for doing that. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Thank you. And coming up, my panel weighs in on Trump's early morning attack on the mayor of San Juan and the recovery effort that is underway, and a lot of people think not going so well. That's next. Very satisfied, great job, incredible. Those are some of the words that Donald Trump and administration officials have used to describe their relief efforts in Puerto Rico after the U.S. territory was devastated by Hurricane Maria. Now, it should go without saying, but nothing is great, let alone incredible, about what's going on in Puerto Rico. And Trump administration officials are facing a growing backlash over the sluggishness of the federal response, as well as for tone-deaf remarks like this one by Elaine Duke, the acting Homeland Security Secretary, during a Thursday press conference.
I am very satisfied. I know it's a hard storm to recover from, but the amount of progress that's been made, and I really would appreciate any support that we get. I know it is really a good news story in terms of our ability to reach people and the limited number of deaths that have taken place in such a devastating hurricane.
A good news story. Just let that sink in for a moment. Make no mistake about it, the situation in Puerto Rico is dire. Roughly half the residents are still without running water. Just 36 of Puerto Rico's 69 hospitals are open and have power. Millions of people, who again are U.S. citizens, are increasingly desperate and begging for help, literally. And a Trump administration official is concerned about good press. After a day of bad news stories about Elaine Duke's response, she had a different message today.
Clearly, the situation here in Puerto Rico after the devastating hurricane is not satisfactory, but together we are getting there, and the progress to date is very, very strong.
But while Acting Secretary Duke seems to have learned something from the criticism, her boss, the president, well, he's still Donald Trump. This morning, he tweeted out more self-congratulatory praise, quote, Puerto Rico Governor Ricardo Rosselló just stated the administration and the president, every time we've spoken, they've delivered. The fact is, Puerto Rico has been destroyed by 2 hurricanes. Big decisions will have to be made as to the cost of its rebuilding, exclamation point. Now, if you didn't catch that, in addition to highlighting some positive comments about himself, Trump also cast doubt on whether Washington would even lend a hand to repair the damage to the U.S. territory of Puerto Rico. There's a big question mark over that at the moment, with a spokesman for FEMA telling NBC News that administrators want to assess the damage before committing to fixing public infrastructure. During a speech this morning, Trump muddied the waters even further on whether Puerto Rico will get that assistance.
The government of Puerto Rico will have to work with us to determine how this massive rebuilding effort will end up being one of the biggest ever, will be funded and organized, and what we will do with the tremendous amount of existing debt already on the island.
Hours after that speech, Trump was answering questions on the White House lawn about the administration's relief efforts. And at the very same time, in San Juan, the city's mayor, Carmen Yulín Cruz, was also speaking about the administration's relief efforts. And the difference in their responses is worth listening to. First, here's what Donald Trump said.
I'll tell you, the governor of Puerto Rico has been unbelievably generous with his statements. I mean, he's been praising our efforts. And this is very difficult. This is a total devastation. I can tell you this. We have done an incredible job, considering there's absolutely nothing to work with.
Okay, and here's San Juan Mayor Carmen Yulín Cruz.
We are dying here. And I cannot fathom the thought that the greatest nation in the world cannot figure out logistics for a small island of 100 miles by 35 miles long. So, Mayday, we are in trouble. Now, I have been very respectful of the FEMA employees. I have been patient, but we have no time for patience anymore. So I am asking the President of the United States to make sure somebody is in charge that is up to the task of saving lives. I will do what I never thought I was going to do. I am begging anyone that can hear us to save us from dying. If anybody out there is listening to us, we are dying, and you are killing us with the inefficiency and the bureaucracy.
Joining us on the phone from San Juan, Puerto Rico, is Jordan Holman, a business reporter for Bloomberg. So, Jordan, it's pretty stark hearing the mayor of an American city. Not since Katrina have we heard that kind of a plea from Americans to their federal government for help. Give us a sense of who's right. Donald Trump says the relief effort is going quite well, and the mayor of San Juan says it's dire. Who's right?
I've been talking to a lot of citizens down here in the past few days in San Juan and other rural towns on Puerto Rico, and it really does sound like the mayor's right. A lot of people here just have not seen FEMA, have not felt like they were getting the deliveries that have been promised. They are waiting in long lines, spending their whole days trying to get gas, trying to take money out of ATMs, trying to get food from the grocery stores. It's just a very arduous process this past week.
And we're hearing reports, and this is from some notes that when you spoke earlier with our producers, what about the situation for schools and for kids? Because, of course, this is the time when they would normally be in school.
It is, and they're not in school. You know, the last time a major hurricane hit Puerto Rico was in the 80s, and school was out for 3 weeks. I was talking to some parents today. They think it might be 2 months. And so that puts parents in a really difficult space because they don't want the kids to fall behind in school. But then also they don't have anywhere to go. The parents are looking for jobs, so the kids are just out in the street.
And if you could just explain sort of to folks who, you know, and obviously these pictures are remarkable, but the damage to the actual physical infrastructure, how extensive is that?
So the highways are pretty much clear, but it's when you go to the rural towns, there's still trees laying around. Utility poles are leaned over into the street as if it's like a ladder. So the roads are pretty bad when you get into the mountainous areas of the island. I was talking to some truckers who are trying to get, you know, this aid and food and ice to people out in those areas, and they say you have to be very brave to try to even get drive there.
Wow. Well, Jordan Holman, thank you very much coming to us from San Juan. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
And joining us now, Melissa Mark-Viverito, who is the New York City Council Speaker. She was born and raised in Puerto Rico and just returned from the island earlier this week after a 3-day visit. Also joining us is Indira Lakshmanan, a columnist for the Boston Globe. So I want to start, you know, where we just ended with Jordan, the physical infrastructure damage. Is there enough, when you were there, did you actually see federal agencies on the ground, U.S. military on the ground, attempting to address those infrastructure issues?
No, not at all. I was there last weekend through Tuesday, and there was absolutely no presence of any sort of federal agency or FEMA that I could see. Now, let's be clear. This is a hurricane that we knew was going to hit the island. We could track its progress for over a week. We knew it was a Category 5. We knew it was going to be a straight-on, dead-on hit on the island, and it was going to be catastrophic. So the fact that there was no effort to even be ready once that hurricane hit, to be sending aid and have assistance on the ground is reprehensible. That is talking about the mismanagement and the lack of empathy and understanding or even having a plan. So this is real sheer chaos. And there is absolutely no empathy coming from this administration. And the fact that he was last weekend at a golf resort, this weekend at a golf resort, when this is happening to 3.4 million U.S. citizens, really speaks to the lack of interest on his part and even attention to something that is so critical and is dire. It really is. And it's just does not seem to be really getting better with only 10,000 people on the ground between troops and relief workers, when we had 40,000 in Florida with Irma, when we had 30,000 in Texas with Harvey, right? When international solidarity, we had over 20,000 troops in Haiti, which was great. I'm not, you know, this pales in comparison. So there is benign neglect happening to the residents and the citizens of Puerto Rico.
And Indira, I want to play one more soundbite. Rachel Maddow tonight had on the San Juan mayor, Carmen Yulín Cruz, and she talked a little bit about just the confusion in the federal response. Let's take a listen.
I was still getting questions from FEMA of what are my priorities. It seems pretty simple. You save lives with food, water, and medical supplies. It just doesn't seem like the most powerful nation in the world could be incapable of just having in 100 by 35 mile long the ability to just put fuel into hospitals.
How does the administration explain, Indira, the inability to do those basic things?
Look, I really empathize with the mayor. My heart goes out to her and to everyone in Puerto Rico, because it's a stunning dissonance to hear the president boasting about this supposedly fantastic response from the federal government. I mean, what it brings to mind for me is 12 years ago when President Bush was roundly ridiculed for saying after Hurricane Katrina, "Heck of a job, Brownie," you know, speaking about his FEMA administrator. And remember how that one statement came to haunt him so much and came to sort of epitomize what was seen as a slow response by Washington to the Katrina crisis. Here's a situation where, as the mayor has pointed out, you know, our response to Haiti and to natural disasters in other countries, not to mention the response to Hurricane Harvey in Texas and Hurricane Irma here in Florida, was so much stronger than it has been. At the beginning, it was almost as if Trump was sort of, you know, AWOL. He was at the Bedminster Trump New Jersey resort, you know, tweeting about NFL players and Alabama, the primary for the Republican primary there, and we didn't hear anything about his response to 3.4 million Americans living in Puerto Rico. Now, on the one hand, about, you know, half of Americans don't even realize that Puerto Ricans are American citizens, and I think that leads to a lot of the neglect that we were just talking about.
Yeah, well, Donald Trump, you know, did business on the island of Puerto Rico. He used to run a golf course there. You would presume that he knows sort of where it is. And this was Donald Trump talking about it today and sort of trying to explain the difficulty, apparently, in his mind of getting to Puerto Rico. This is Donald Trump and big water.
This is an island surrounded by water, big water, ocean water.
Big water. Can we just show the map of where Puerto Rico is in relation to the United States? Okay, it's not far away from the United States. If you just look at that map, you can see where Puerto Rico is in relation to the United States. Donald Trump saying that it's the big water that's preventing the response from being better. Your thoughts?
I mean, it's just, you have to laugh at this. It's just mind-boggling. This is an individual who is incredibly ignorant, doesn't really understand or have any sense of context or understanding of issues, can't pay attention, doesn't seem to have an attention span to really understand the severity, and who is, you know, I say very boldly, I mean, like, he exhibits sociopathic behavior, this lack of empathy and really being able to understand, you know, what people are feeling and being able to empathize in any way. It's just really horrible. The fact that within all of this context of this, this pain and suffering and dying that is happening, that he would even talk about costs of the rebuilding.
Puerto Rico's economic issues.
Exactly. Yeah. Is incredible, right? When that was not being discussed, again with Texas, where he said 75% we're going to take care of the infrastructure we're going to build. You know, again, this narrative of people of color and immigrants, we're migrants, but immigrants, of being drains on the U.S. economy, right? That we don't have anything to contribute, that we're going to have to wait and see if we're going to help you out. I mean, this is incredible. It is racist. I truly believe it. Prejudice behavior that is now being implemented through policy, and it really is costing us so much.
And, you know, Indira, one would want to believe that, you know, that is not the reason for what definitely looks like neglect, but you also have the situation in the U.S. Virgin Islands, which isn't much better, and we weren't even able to find much news and updates on what's happening there. But it's not as if the response to the U.S. Virgin Islands, also in American territory, has you know, been covered in glory.
Well, you know, one thing that we see in common here is that people who live in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands do not have the ability to vote in the general election for president. And I think so it's not only about the color of their skin, but the second-class citizenship that is extremely unfortunate. I think that if they had a vote, if they had a sway in the Electoral College, that would make a difference. Puerto Ricans who are living on the U.S. mainland have a vote if they're living in Florida or New York or wherever else, but if they're living in Puerto Rico, they don't. And I do think that that also influences the president's response in this case. But you know, I think this is a much larger problem here, which, as she says, is a lack of empathy. But it's also the fact that President Trump is trying to put the blame on Puerto Rico itself, saying you had a debt problem before this even started, and we're going to have to see how much we can actually do to help you. It's incredible.
Melissa, I'll give you the last word.
No, I'm saying that 1 million Puerto Ricans live in Florida.
Yes.
It is the largest population outside of the island at the moment. So we have to be the voice for the island. We have to be the voice and put the pressure on the administration. And I believe that within the congressional delegation and the Senate red delegation in Florida, they're going to understand that this has consequences.
That's absolutely right. People are not going to forget. New York City Council Speaker Melissa Mark Viverito, thank you very much. And Indira Lakshmanan, thank you both for joining us. And coming up, price cut. Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price is out of a job and likely back to flying commercial. And later, it begins. Special Counsel Robert Mueller's team goes to the White House as a new report tonight details why the White House counsel almost quit over Jared Kushner.
By the way, you going to get the votes? He better get them. He better get them. Oh, he better. Otherwise, I'll say, Tom, you're fired. I'll get somebody.
And today, Tom Price, the Health and Human Services Secretary, resigned, becoming the first cabinet secretary to leave the Trump administration. But technically, it wasn't health care that took him down. Price resigned after days of scrutiny for jetting around the country on private planes. According to some estimates, his private jet trips gobbled up more than $1 million of taxpayer money. In his resignation letter, Price said, "I regret that the recent events have created a distraction." The president today accepted Price's resignation, making Don J. Wright, the current Deputy Assistant HHS Secretary, the acting secretary. And tonight, Trump's budget director, Mick Mulvaney, sent a letter to the rest of Trump's cabinet officials, reminding them of something you'd think they'd already know, that they are public servants. Quote, "Every penny we spend comes from the taxpayer. We thus owe it to the taxpayer to work as hard managing that money wisely as the taxpayer must do to earn it in the first place. Put another way, just because something is legal doesn't make it right." That's a lesson several other Trump cabinet secretaries might want to take to heart. Hint, hint, Steve Mnuchin, Scott Pruitt, Ryan Zinke, and Donald Shulkin, all under fire for their swanky taxpayer-funded travel as well. And a new report tonight finds that it's not just the gilded Trump cabinet doing the spending. According to CBS News, the Trump kids' annual Aspen ski vacation in March, that fancy vacay cost taxpayers some $300,000. Joining us now, Jonathan Capehart, an opinion writer for The Washington Post and an MSNBC contributor, and Betsy Woodruff, politics reporter for The Daily Beast. So, you know, Jonathan, this is an administration that's come in saying they were going to go after waste, fraud, and abuse. We can't afford food stamps. We can't afford health care. But they certainly do live high on the hog. Did Tom Price pay the price for living too well on the public dime? Or in your view, was it living too high on the public dime plus health care didn't pass?
It's that, but also the other thing you left out, getting bad headlines that reflected poorly on the president. Because we have a president who cares only about what his headlines are. And so a couple of days ago, Joy, I tweeted out, let's be clear here. President Trump is not upset by what Secretary Price did. He's upset by the negative press caused by what Secretary Price did. And so with all the people that you mentioned who also have their sort of flight gate problems, you know, flying around on private planes at the expense of taxpayers, only Secretary Price is the one who has had to walk the plank. And it didn't help that health care, Trump care, went down in a ball of flames again. But I don't think we're going to see any of those other people you mentioned walking the plank in the way that former Secretary Price did.
Well, we'll see what happens if tax reform doesn't go through. Then Steve Mnuchin, you know, his travel might look like a lot more interesting to Donald Trump. Betsy, you know, Price did try to reverse those headlines Jonathan talked about. He tried to sort of clean them up. He offered to pay back $51,887, but not the full cost of the planes, just the cost of his seat. Is there any evidence that that effort to try to clean it up might have actually made things worse in the eyes of Donald Trump or made him look weak?
I haven't seen any evidence suggesting that that's part of the reason. And my sense here very much is that the planes were basically just an excuse for the president to fire Secretary Price. My understanding is that there was little love lost between Price and President Trump. These are two very different men. Price is Southern. He's very conservative. He's very much in the Paul Ryan mold when it comes to how public figures present themselves, how they perform their work. Meanwhile, Donald Trump, of course, dispositionally is extremely at odds at that. My sense is that their relationship was never a particularly warm one. And then when you couple that with the fact that Price became the face of this huge failure to repeal the Affordable Care Act, it actually, this plane crisis was sort of my sense, the sense that I get just from having conversations with folks this evening, is that the plane crisis was a convenient reason for the president to shuttle off Price. But remember, the president has an extraordinarily high comfort level with controversies. This is a guy who was willing to give the benefit of the doubt to white supremacists in Charlottesville. The idea that all of a sudden he's worried about the bad PR from people flying on fancy planes doesn't really pass the lab test.
Yeah, and he hired a lot of billionaires for somebody who's concerned about optics, Jonathan. And not only Price is not the only one, to Betsy's point. You had Kellyanne Conway, who was also on that Price private plane trip from Dulles to Philly and back on September 15th. That cost about $25,000. She did that as well. You had Steve Mnuchin, who's had his own issues with spending. You've had Ryan Zinke, who back in July, who's made trips that were expensive. You had Mike Pence, who it was reported his Super Bowl trip cost taxpayers about $89 grand. So it's not as if Price is the only one, nor is he the only sort of big spending billionaire. So it had to be something more, right?
Right. It had to be something more. And the disaster that was Trump Care, I agree with Betsy, was probably part of it. But here's the thing, just broadly speaking, Joy, that makes this whole thing so galling. Donald Trump ran for president saying we're going to drain the swamp. Secretary Price was one of these people who is on record bemoaning sort of the profligate ways of Washington. And even I think there's him going on about private planes that the government has, and yet he is drummed out over his use of private planes and like flagrantly using private planes. I mean, Joy, would you take a plane from Philadelphia to New York? Or I would never take a plane from Philadelphia to Washington. And so to my mind, that shows just this unbelievable disconnect between, you know, the words that they say when they're in Congress, and then suddenly they are wrapped in the trappings of power, and suddenly they see these planes and all these things, and they take advantage of them. They have lost their way when their message that got them into office is completely ignored, and they forget that this money that they're spending isn't theirs, it's the taxpayers. And I think this is ultimately going to be yet another problem for the president, because people are going to start maybe one day paying attention to the fact that the words from the campaign and the words from the administration don't match the actions of either.
Yeah, and you know, Betsy, you know, I was talking earlier on Chris Hayes' show about the idea that, you know, Trump is almost Teflon to his base. There's nothing he can do that would upset them. They see his gold palace as sort of aspirational. They're fine with it. But at a certain point, when you have so many cabinet members, and when it's Pruitt at EPA, it's Zinke at Interior, it's Shulkin at VA, it's the Treasury Secretary, it's the Vice President, that are all living high on the hog on the taxpayer dime. At a certain point, does the Trump voter begin to say, wait a minute, they're laughing at me. They're using this money, they're using these jobs as a way to pad their lifestyles, and they're literally just sort of laughing in the face of those of us who wanted to drain the swamp?
My sense is that Trump voters will only say that if Trump himself says that. And part of American culture is almost this glorification, idolization of extraordinary levels of wealth. That explains so much of the entertainment we consume, the reality TV shows that we choose to watch. The word you use here is really helpful, aspiration, right? So the fact that Mnuchin's wife was posting Instagram pictures of herself and tagging the designers that she was wearing isn't something I think that necessarily would trouble the Trump base. And I think if it were going to, we'd see Trump behave differently. But the reality is that Melania Trump, the First Lady, Ivanka, Trump's inner circle, these folks, none of these people are trying to hide or disguise the fact that they're extraordinarily wealthy. And as long as the president's comfortable with it, I think his voters are going to be comfortable with it. Thus far, I've not seen any indications that the president's opulent lifestyle is going to be a liability for him. When it comes to his cabinet members, the only question is, does he decide to say it's a problem, as he did in the case of Secretary Price, or does he stick up to them and try to change the conversation?
Well, I'm old enough to remember when Tea Party people and Republicans used to claim that government workers were all overpaid and we needed a hiring freeze, and they didn't deserve the money they were making. We had to bust their unions and pay them less. I remember that one long ago. You know, I'm sorry, we're out of time. Quickly, okay. Jonathan, go on, say it.
No, really quickly, no one begrudges someone being wealthy and serving in the government. That's not the issue here. And I just want to give one shout out to Secretary Betsy DeVos, who is wildly wealthy, flies on a private plane, but it's her private plane.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah. There we go. And a shout out. Betsy Woodruff, thank you for joining us. And coming up, Donald Trump claims he won't benefit from his tax proposal at all. Okay, well, he can show us his tax returns and prove it, because the billionaires in his cabinet, well, they stand to benefit a whole lot.
My administration is working every day to lift the burdens on our companies and on our workers so that you can thrive, compete, and grow. And at the very center of that plan is a giant, beautiful, massive, the biggest ever in our country, tax cut.
The tax cut will be giant, beautiful, massive, if your name is Donald Trump. If you're a member of the American middle class, not so much. According to the New York Times, the plan would save Trump more than $1 billion in taxes, including the money he'd get to leave tax-free to whichever Trump children make it into the will. Ivanka, the Lion Hunters, Tiffany, through elimination of the estate tax. It would also save Donald Trump's Commerce Secretary, Wilbur Ross, $545 million, according to Bloomberg. It would save the father-in-law of Trump Education Secretary Betsy DeVos $900 million. It would save the head of the Small Business Administration, Linda McMahon, and her husband, Vince McMahon, $250 million. But for the average American, well, the Trump plan could raise your taxes. Today, the Nonpartisan Tax Policy Center found by 2027, taxes would rise for roughly 1/4 of taxpayers, including nearly 30% of those with incomes between $50,000 and $150,000. That likely includes a lot of Trump supporters who thought the Trump tax plan would be more like this.
My plan is for the working people, and my plan is for jobs. No, I don't benefit. I don't benefit.
You don't think more people benefit?
In fact, very, very strongly, as you see, I think there's very little benefit for people of wealth.
Back with us is Jonathan Capehart, and joining us now is Catherine Rampell, an opinion columnist for the Washington Post. So, Catherine, Donald Trump claims his plans for the middle class. It's clear from the numbers that it is for the very, very, very wealthy.
Yes.
But he can sell it to his base anyway, right?
Well, the thing about being a populist is that you have to do things that are popular. Usually that's helpful.
Yeah.
And if you look at the polling about tax cuts for the wealthy, tax cuts for corporations, they are not popular, even amongst Republicans. Large shares of Republicans, majorities even, depending on what poll you look at, believe the taxes should be raised on corporations and the wealthy. So no, I think it'll be a very hard sell for his base.
This is when they find out if they're in that those lower brackets, if they get their taxes increased. Jonathan, one of the things that Donald Trump today did was something he loves to do, is just brag. And here he is today talking about the wild economic growth under his presidency.
GDP growth hit over 3% last quarter, was just adjusted yesterday, and is now at 3.1%, a number that hasn't been seen in a very, very long time, and a number that's way ahead of schedule.
He also tweeted GDP was revised upward to 3.1 last quarter. Many people thought it would be years before that happened. We have just begun. Well, in fact, quarterly growth was 3% or higher 8 different times under President Barack Obama. Most recently in the first quarter of 2015 when it was 3.2%. So that's not even true.
Yeah. The president, as you showed in the intro, he loves his superlatives. Everything is the biggest, the best, and never happened before he became president. And yet, despite all the evidence to the contrary that we can see with our own eyes, he's proven wrong. But in the world of...
The 11th hour is up next.